thanks immensely. I didn't know we were allowed to tell me exactly which my task was. No, I've not been that gloomy yesterday. For after all, I was discussing with Professor Hart after my lecture. He told me, why? You had promised a course. I couldn't say anyone. Now, if you want a course, here's one. It's Catholic Theology. In a book written in the late 19th century about Catholic theology from the Enlightenment to the beginning of Neo-Scholasticism, and written in Latin, the author says, or opens chapter with the word, and then after the Napoleonic Wars, quasi mortua jacebet, it was lying dead. Years of course. Anyway, I suspect that the Enlightenment, what happened after the Enlightenment, was probably more dangerous to Protestant theology, or at least to the German world. But we tend to think that the German world is Protestant, just not altogether true. And in my second lecture, I was speaking about the conflict of faculties. And the conflict of faculties is a phrase coined by Immanuel Kant, and it's Enlightenment phrase. Kant, in the small book entitled The Conflict of Faculties, starts as a philosopher deciding what each faculty is allowed to know and to say. Kant knows what the mathematician has to say. Kant knows what the theologian is allowed to say. And he knows, of course, what the philosopher is entitled to know and to say. If one starts with Kant, one remarks that theology has almost nothing to say. Philosophy of religion, as envisaged by Kant, says more or less whatever the theologian is allowed to say. One has to read first Kant's philosophy of religion, the reason, religion and the limits of pure reason, or to read the first book by his pupil Fichte, Critique of All Revelation, to know exactly what niche is reserved to the theologian in late Enlightenment university. The theologian has almost nothing to do and almost nothing to say. Theologians, of course, reacted, and it's a good thing for them to have reacted. They reacted in many ways, and I don't think I can coordinate all these attempts. Chronologically, the first, but I suppose I mentioned it, was Schleiermacher's attempt. Now, Schleiermacher is no scientist, so his problem is not to defend the scientificity of theology, but he's a great scholar, a great Plato scholar, the founder of modern hermeneutics and aesthetics and all that. Schleiermacher is the spokesman of culture, or Kultur in German. And his strategy is to prove that well-educated man needs first religion and then Christianity. In his first book, The Speeches on Religion, he argued that you cannot be a well-educated man and despise religion. If you do so, you will be a mutilated man. And in the second great book on theology, The Christian Faith, he will argue that, again, from the standpoint of well-educated Germany, one needs to be a Christian. There is room in higher education for theology, for religion first, for theology secondly. Schleiermacher had not read Dilthey. It's no surprising. He was dead before Dilthey was born. But anyway, he would happily, I think, have borrowed from Dilthey the concept of signs of the Spirit, Geisteswissenschaft. Dilthey is a philosopher who distinguished sharply between two intellectual activities, understanding and explaining. Sciences of nature had to explain. Sciences of the spirit had to understand. And undeniably, the function of theology in Schleiermacher is to help us understand who we are. It's also to help us understand who God is. Schleiermacher had a colleague at Berlin, and this colleague despised him intensely. The colleague was Hegel. Now, Hegel had been a student of theology at Tübingen. In fact, all German philosophers in the 19th century, till Husserl excluded, had been students of theology and knew some theology. So, Hegel, a former student at the Stift of Tübingen, knew some theology. He even wrote theological writings in his youth. But his ambition was more than that. Hegel's ambition was to integrate theology into some large enterprise, let us call it loosely a system. So Hegel integrates more or less in his systematic work what we call theology. That there have been many renewals in Hegel's studies since the end of the 19th century. And one renewal started roughly in 1960 or 58 with the book on Hegel's Trinitarian theology. Hegel has a Trinitarian theology. And we have a library full of books on Hegel's Christology. One of my students did a dissertation on Hegel and original sin. Whatever the theologian, the professional theologian says, had been said in some way by Hegel. And all is nice and in apple by order. There is room for theology in the university because the philosopher teaches theology. All which is theological is taught better by the philosopher than by the theologian. And there, a telling anecdote that Schleiermacher and Hegel were together in Berlin for years. Now, in 1831, an event happened. 1831 was the third centenary of the Confession of Augsburg. Now, Schleiermacher was asked to read the discourse on the Confession of Augsburg, but he was invited to read it only in the Faculty of Theology. The king had asked a more solemn thing to happen, and the solemn commemoration of the Augsburg Confession was a discourse by Hegel. And Hegel gave a very splendid text, which is perfect self-understanding of German Protestantism in 1831, and proving that he had a sound understanding of what the Augsburg Confession was. But nonetheless, the theologian had only been able to speak within his faculty, whereas the philosopher has spoken in the name of the state.